Hi guys, it's Friday. Welcome back to my channel, True Crime and Felines. Every Friday I sit down with one or more of my 14 felines and we talk about a true crime case or mystery. My name is Brandy. If you haven't subscribed, please do so or give this video a like. This week's case has to do with the murders of the Defeo family. Now, if they're better known as the Amityville murders. No. I'm not talking about the haunting. We're not talking about the haunting in this video. We're talking about the real live murders that took place in 1974 that spawned all of the stories about the house being haunted. These murders are real. They really did happen. So let's dive into this case and try to separate fact from fiction. So Ronald Defeo Jr. was born September 26th, 1951. He went by the name of Butch. His parents were Louise and Ronald Sr. Defeo, and they would end up having 5 kids in total. There would be Butch as the oldest, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and then John Matthew was the youngest. Now, Ronald Sr. was a manager at a local Buick dealership that was actually owned by his father-in-law, Louise's dad. Louise's dad spoiled Louise a lot, and it was said that when she asked for a bottle of perfume, she would get a whole case from her father. If she asked for a washer or dryer, he would actually buy 2 for her just in case they broke down. Now, as you can imagine, Louise's father was very well off and had a lot of money. The Defeos weren't that bad off either. They actually had some money in their pocket due to Ronald's generous salary working at his father-in-law's dealership. However, Louise's father stepped in and bought them a house as a gift in 1965. And this house would be the famous 112 Ocean Drive in Amityville, New York. So when the family moved into the house, Butch would have been 14 at this time. Now, Butch's childhood was comfortable due to their money, but he wasn't content at all as a child growing up in Amityville. Ronald Sr. was known to be an abusive man, and he took that out on mostly Louise, but some of the kids got it too, especially as they got older. Now, Butch was overweight, so he was made fun of in high school a lot, and around 17 years old, he would start lashing out at anybody and anything, including his father. Now, his parents became concerned about his behavior and would take him to a counselor or therapy, but Butch didn't feel that he needed it, so he never tried, and the counselors didn't work. So Butch got into drugs, and in order to sort of self-medicate, as many people do, his parents would start giving him lavish gifts as an incentive to do better behaviorally in school. However, because of the drug use and violent outbursts, Butch would end up getting expelled from school when he was about 17. So Ronald Sr. decided to give Butch a job at the dealership. He was given kind of a cushy job and made quite a bit of money in that job. Now, the funny part is that this weekly stipend or salary that Ronald Sr. gave Butch, he would get that regardless if he showed up to work or not. The money seemed to help Butch be more stable and not have so many behavioral problems or act out. So they would give him this weekly stipend or salary, and also would end up buying him a speedboat and other lavish gifts. Now, because Butch really didn't have to have anything to spend his money on, he would get further into drugs and start experimenting with heroin. He would also begin buying a few guns here and there and started to act more strangely, more withdrawn. as time went on. Now, it was really plain to see that Butch and his father did not get along. There was always several arguments they got into, both at home and at the dealership. There was one time when Ronald Sr. and his wife Louise got into a fight, and there was a physical altercation. Butch grabbed one of his guns from his room and pointed it at his father. Now, he did pull the trigger, but the gun malfunctioned and never fired. Now, this kind of scared Ron Sr. a little bit, but he ended up doing nothing about it and just walking away from the argument. Now, the weekly stipend or salary that Butch was getting would get spent really fast because of his heroin habit, and the money began not being enough. So Butch would start a scheme to embezzle money from the dealership. Him and another co-worker actually set up a mock robbery and ended up getting about $19,000. Now, Butch would later be found guilty of this crime, and he also would get charged with stealing an outboard motor from a dock in 1973. So now he was getting into crime as well as drugs and guns. When the authorities questioned Ron Sr. about the stolen money, Ron Sr. automatically suspected his son, but he didn't fire him from the dealership. When Ron Sr. confronted Butch about it, Butch became very irate and threatened to kill him. Now, Butch and his dad would continue to argue and get in fights, and on several occasions, Butch would tell people that he was going to kill his father, but nobody believed him. So let's cut to the morning of November 13th, 1974. Butch had gotten up early, showered, dressed, and went into work. Now, he went to work really early, way before he usually is there, and the dealership wasn't even open yet. When one of the service managers came to open the dealership, he stated that he saw Butch sleeping in his car, and he woke Butch up to have him come in and start work. So Butch would go about his day working, and when Ronald Sr. didn't show up for work, he would call home in front of people, and as nobody answered the phone, he would tell anybody who would listen that he just couldn't get an answer. Nobody would answer the phone at his home. Butch would end up leaving the dealership early, as he did most days, and he ended up meeting up at a bar with some friends. Now, during this day, other people noticed that the family was not answering the door or the phone. A neighbor of the Defeos, who would always stop by and take the Defeo children to school, had come and knocked on the door that morning, and nobody answered. The neighbor left and dropped her own kids off at school and then came back to the Defeo house. She would knock on the door again about 8:40 a.m. and still couldn't get an answer, even though the cars were in the driveway. Now, the neighbor would become concerned as the day went on, and she ended up calling the house at 5 p.m. and didn't get an answer then either. Now, Butch was at the bar, which was actually only about 2 blocks from the house. And he would tell his friends too that he tried calling the house all day and nobody would answer. So somebody must have told him, well, you need to go check on your family. So he left the bar about 6 o'clock and went home to check on the family. At 6:30 p.m., he showed back up at the bar like he'd been crying. He was panicking, and he said, my parents have been shot. I need help. So his friends and several patrons would actually go with Butch the 2 blocks back to his house, and they would go inside the house. Butch at this time refused to go back in the house because he was so upset. So the people would go into the house and realize that the whole family had been shot. Louise, Ronald Sr., Dawn, who was 18 at the time, Allison, who was 13 at the time, Mark, who was 12, and John Matthew, who was only 9 years old. They would discover that all the bodies were actually on the bed and positioned on their stomach. Ronald Sr. and Louise were both shot in the back and shot twice. The siblings were only shot once, but both the boys were shot in the back and both the girls were actually shot in the head. There was evidence that Louise, the mom, and Allison, who was 13, actually might have been awake when they were shot. There was no signs of struggle. There was speculation that this couldn't be done just by one shooter. There's no way that the shooter could go between 2 floors of the house and just take out all the family members without anybody hearing the shots. So then speculation is that the family may have been drugged. However, at the autopsies, there were no drugs found in the family's system. Butch's friend would end up calling 911 from the house phone, and authorities would arrive. They would start asking questions right away of the neighbors and of Butch. Now, the neighbors reported no gunshots. They didn't hear anything. All they heard was the Defeo's dog barking, which I guess was a regular thing because the dog barked all the time. So then they turned to Butch, the only surviving member of the family, and started asking him questions. Now, Butch stated that morning he was watching TV really early in the morning and he just couldn't sleep. So he decided to leave for work, and he says he swore his family was alive when he left. Now, Butch would work most of the day, trying to get a hold of his family throughout the day because Ronald Sr. didn't show up for work. And then he left work early, and he went to the bar with his friends. When he came home, he discovered his parents and then went back to the bar for help. He stated he had no idea that his siblings were dead until all the patrons and his friends came back and they discovered the siblings. Butch did not. Now, when the authorities asked Butch, do you know anybody that could have done this, or did the family have any enemies? Now, Butch would first state that a local mob hitman named Louis Follini was probably the person who killed his family. He explained that Follini lived with them for a short while, and he knew that Ronald Sr. and Butch kept a stash of money and gems in the basement, and Butch stated that those were gone. They put Butch in protective custody, thinking that there was a hideout, and Butch ended up staying the night in a file room on a cot at the police station. Now, the next day, when they would question him again, Butch changed the story a little bit because there was evidence coming forward that Butch was home at the time of the murders. So the story changed a little bit, and Butch insisted that it was Follini, but he actually came in and put a gun to Butch's head and made him follow him around to every room while he took out his family and made him watch. Now, when the police ended up looking into this further, Follini he was out of state at the time, probably committing another crime in another state. So there's no way he could have been there, and they had proof he was out of state, so his alibi was solid. The police also started questioning Butch's story and putting things together. Per the autopsy, they knew that what killed the family was a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. And as they were searching the house and searched Butch's room, they found .35 caliber rifle bullets in Butch's room that were pretty new. They also determined that the family had to be killed around 3 a.m. that morning, and Butch claimed to be home at that time, not leaving the house until about 6 a.m. So they put the pressure on Butch and said, look, you really need to tell me what happened. Butch finally broke down and admitted to the killings, and he would say, once I started, I could not stop. It happened too fast. Butch would tell the authorities where to find the actual rifle that he used, which was off the back of the property in a canal. When the authorities searched that, they also found some bloody clothing and towels that Butch had stashed in the same area to hide evidence. Butch was arrested at that time. The trial would take place almost a year after the murders on October 14th in 1975. Butch at first pleaded insanity. He stated he heard voices telling him to kill his family. A state psychiatrist would be brought in, and he testified that Butch did suffer from antisocial personality disorder. Now, this is characterized by the person having lack of empathy, the person is self-centered, it has emotional problems, and has a tendency to rely on lying and cheating and deception, and also has a hard time with authority and rules. But even though he suffered from this, they determined that Butch knew exactly what he was doing at the time of the murders. He just didn't care. After all, he cleaned up the crime scene by getting rid of his bloody clothes and towels, cleaning up the shell casings, and hiding the gun. At the end of the trial, Butch was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 concurrent 25 to life sentence terms. Basically, he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Now, he has had appeal hearings and parole hearings since that date, and they all have been denied. The last one was actually in 2015. Now, as Butch sat in jail, he would do a number of interviews with television authors, psychiatrists, and his story kept changing. Now, his sister Dawn was 18 years old at the time that these killings happened, and it was stated that she hated her father and wanted to actually move to Florida to be with her boyfriend. Her father was not going to let her move to Florida, and it was a cause of contention in their relationship, along with some alleged abuse, physical abuse as well. Now, in 1986, Butch would come out and say that his sister Dawn is actually the one that killed his father over this contention about wanting to move to Florida. And what happened is their mother was so distraught over Ronald Sr. dying that she just snapped, and she ended up killing Dawn and then went around and killed all the children and then shot herself in the end. The reason why he didn't tell that story at first is because he was afraid of certain family members, namely his grandfather, Michael Brigante Sr., and so it would be his great uncle, Peter Defeo. Now, these two were actually identified by authorities to be part of the Genovese crime family at the time. And the Genovese crime family is one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime in the New York City area. And they were a part of the American Mafia. So you can kind of see how he could be afraid of them. So he thought if he came out and said that his mother did this, that her family would come after him. But in 1986, he said they were both dead at the time, so he had no longer anything to fear. However, Mike Brigante did die in 1985. That much was true. But Peter Defeo was not. According to the police, Peter Defeo was very much alive in 1986. But beyond that, the story that he told did not match up with the evidence, because both his parents were found in bed, shot in the back. So there's no way that Louise shot herself in the back, and there was no other bullet wounds on her, just 2 shots in the back. That story didn't quite match up with the evidence. So in 1990, Butch kind of altered the story a little bit. He stated that Dawn is the one that actually murdered the entire family with an unknown assailant that was able to get out of the house before Butch could identify them. When Butch arrived on the scene and saw the assailant fled and saw what Dawn did, Dawn then turned the gun on Butch and tried to shoot him. Butch would then say that he accidentally killed Dawn while they were struggling for the rifle. Now, in the year 2000, Butch would allegedly meet with an author named Rick Osuna. Now, Rick Osuna actually wrote a book about the Defeo murders. And in the book, he states that Butch told him a similar story, but that the murders were carried out by Butch himself, Dawn, and 2 of their friends. Butch explained that his parents were going to try to kill him because of his drugs and behaviors and making the family look bad, so he needed to take his parents out first. He was upstairs in the parents' bedroom shooting them. And what he didn't realize is that Dawn was going room to room and shooting each of the siblings. He stated that Dawn said she needed to take out all the witnesses. Upon seeing what Dawn did, Butch knocked Dawn unconscious with the barrel of the rifle and then shot her in the head. Now, authorities did find traces of unburnt gunpowder on Dawn's nightgown, but ballistic experts would say that the unburned gunpowder was discharged through the muzzle of the gun, meaning that she was in proximity of the gun when it was fired, not necessarily that she fired the gun herself. As far as the alleged two accomplices, one had passed away at this time and the other one had a solid alibi. So that story fell apart as well, especially since all the family was killed with a .35 caliber rifle. According to Butch's story, he had the rifle and Dawn had a .38. Now, later, after the book came out by this author, Osana, Butch would claim that he never gave that information to Osana and that Osana pretty much made it up. So who knows whether Butch really met with the author or not. And as a side note, this author actually was working with George Lutz, who claimed that the house was haunted, and their relationship fell through because Osana would claim that he saw through the family's lies, that there really was no haunting, but then George Lutz would claim that Osana really sucked as a writer and there was grammatical errors and everything else, and they just didn't get along, so they separated ways. Then Osana, still wanting to write a book about the Amityville area, ended up focusing more on the murders and not the haunting. So, whose side do you believe? Now, the last story that Butch would come up with was in 2005. He had an interview with a psychologist, and the story was kind of the same, but he added kind of these new twists to it. Now, the two friends were no longer involved. And he stated that Dawn came to him with the idea to kill their father. Butch was okay with this idea because 10 days before the murder, there was an altercation between Butch and Ronald Sr., one of many, but this one actually, I guess, snapped Butch. They got in an altercation and Ronald Sr. would end up breaking a pool stick over Butch's head, and he would claim that his mother Louise was in the corner cheering on her husband. He said at that moment, that's when he knew his father must die. So on the morning of November, Butch said he went upstairs with the gun just to scare his dad, that he really didn't plan on shooting him, he just wanted to scare him. But what happened is Ronald Sr. became enraged that Butch was pointing a gun at him once again and started running at him. So Butch pulled the trigger in self-defense. Again, this is not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that Ronald Sr. was shot twice in the back while laying in bed. So, okay, well, Butch would go on to say that the reason that he shot his mom because she was reaching for her gun, you know, because she was in bed and reaching for her gun on the side table that apparently she kept there all the time. And so then he had to shoot her in self-defense also. Again, she was shot in the back. You get it. Anyway, so then because he, you know, shooting your parents gets you all riled up, he had to go for a drive to cool down. So he got in his car, he left Dawn and his siblings in the house alive, and he went for a drive. When he came back, he said he returned to the house and he saw that Dawn had shot all of the siblings. When he questioned Dawn on why she did that, she stated that she had a severe jealousy of Allison, her 13-year-old sister, because she was prettier and Dad would treat her better, and that it just consumed her and she couldn't stand it, so she shot her in the head. And then she went around and shot all the other siblings because they were witnesses. Butch would state that he was so angry that she did that he ended up shooting her in the head. So Butch today is currently being held at the Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Beacom, New York. He turned 70 years old this year, and he doesn't do much interviews anymore. So the house was bought then by the Lutzes in December of 1975. And that's when, you know, the story began about the hauntings and everything like that. And now, after the Lutzes moved out, it stayed vacant for a long time because of the stories. But in 1977, the Camardis bought it, and they said the tourists were a nightmare. So they ended up actually working with the post office, and they changed the address on the house to confuse tourists and everything. They actually would remodel the house as well, and those famous windows, those evil eye windows that every movie focuses on, they actually had them removed and replaced with square windows. The house does look much different than it did back in the 70s. Now, a lot of people ask, like, why did Butch do this? Or if you believe maybe Dawn was an accomplice, we don't know. But if you believe she did it, why did they do this? Now, Butch would never really confess a motive. Not really. He would just complain that his dad beat him and was terrible to him. However, after the killings, before Butch was actually made a formal suspect, so it was the first 2-3 days, he asked authorities how he could make a claim on his dad's life insurance and how to get that started. So the motive could have been money, was probably money, I mean, based on Butch's past. It was also well known that, you know, especially on his mother's side, that family was involved in the mafia, and maybe he wanted that life. So who knows how that could have affected him as well. Now, of course, there is also the theory that the house really is haunted, and the voices that Butch really was hearing was demons telling him to kill his family, that it really wasn't his fault that he became possessed. Now, is the place haunted? Okay, that is a whole other video that I would have to make to go into all of the facts and speculation and everything. Now, of course, the movies took certain liberties with the stories to make them more dramatic. We know this, right? So sometimes even the Defeo murders themselves are not exactly fact in those movies. Some of the movies took a lot of liberty. Yeah, that happened. Anyway, besides the movies, others would come out from, you know, ghost hunters to psychologists sometimes. They would come out and actually say things that there are zero evidence for. For example, one of the movies actually implies that the house is built on an ancient burial ground or had an enclosure for Native Americans that were either dying or insane or whatever, and that's what's caused the negative energy in the house. There is no evidence of this. Now, in Amityville 2, The Possession, they also hinted towards the two siblings that were loosely based on the Defeo family had an incestuous relationship. This is based on a rumor that Butch and Dawn had an incestuous relationship. It was also stated by a family member that Ronald Sr. had molested Dawn, and that is where the hatred came from for her father as well. But again, there's no evidence of either of these things. They are things that were just thrown out, and nobody has backed them up. So that is this week's case. I hope that we cleared up some facts and fiction, and that we realized that the murders really did happen. It was not just a movie. These murders were real and really did happen. So what do you think? Do you think the place is haunted because of these murders? Do you think Dawn was an accomplice and then was taken out at the end? What do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you for sticking around, and we will be back next Friday. Please click that subscribe button and the bell so you know when it goes up, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.